Within,
Yeah.
you started Advanta-STAR in the early 90s. What led you in those early years to come up with the concept of Advanta-STAR, what has become now the premier automotive research company in America?
Well, I had a position as a training and inventory manager at a dealership, and we were just opening up. So I was ordering all of the new inventory, trying to balance it correctly, get the good units in. And while me and the general manager and the dealer principal were sitting up in the podium, uh, a car carrier rolled up in the lot, and we saw it was covered in Dodge Omnis. This was 1990, so it was the very last year the Dodge Omni was produced. And there had to have been a dozen on there easily because it was a small car. And we're discussing, what went wrong. And turns out back then, at least, the OEM, the manufacturer, could order cars for you behind your back and just have them shipped out. And while we're making
They pretty
calls
much
and trying
dumped
to,
all that on you, right?
yep, dumped it right up. Well, that one, the worst part, so the as we're sitting there discussing it and calling people and panicking, another car carrier rolls up with another dozen Dodge Omni. So all told, by the end of the day, uh, we had a 3-year supply of Dodge Omnis in the dealership. We had more Dodge Omnis than probably has ever been in one place except the factory at one time in the previous history of the world.
So basically, as a new dealer, they took everything that was sitting on the table and said, just send it to
Yeah,
those guys, right?
push it off on them. They'll have
Good luck.
Yeah,
they'll have
yeah,
no way of dealing with it.
yeah,
And
exactly.
the thing is, we had a bunch of brand new salespeople, and we had a bunch of seasoned professionals, but they weren't seasoned professionals at selling Dodge Omnis. They were from Toyota and Honda and different places like that.
Yeah.
And they
So they
looked at
weren't
these
familiar with the
cars.
product whatsoever, right? They were just totally green like everybody else.
Oh, any familiarity they had with the product was like, if I get too close to this thing, I'm going to catch a disease.
But but
'Cause,
but you had some familiarity with it personally, though, right?
oh yeah, because I had been in that make for quite a while, and I'd sold them for years. And once I did a little research on them because in my position as trainer, I also needed to bring people up to speed on the product knowledge with these units. I determined that it actually had a large number of uh, market advantages against its competitive set, which back in the day would have been things like Excels and uh, Tercels and Sentras and things.
So pretty much the Toyota, Honda, Hyundai competitors, and then even some of the domestics,
Oh
you
yeah,
know, you
Escort and
yeah,
Cavalier and such.
you saw from being the corporate trainer for the company that, there were merits to these products, even though to the public or to the OEM, they really were having difficulty moving the product. But you saw there were some things that you could, if you highlighted enough of them, that they would make them more marketable, correct?
Yeah, especially the salespeople weren't familiar with any advantages on these cars. I mean, this was one of the well, in its price class, this was the first car to have a driver's side airbag, and it was standard. In the NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration crash tests, it did better than any of the small cars. Partially due to the driver's airbag, but partially due because it had a good unibody structure on it. It had a very powerful engine for its class, 92 horsepower. I mean, that was more than any of the other little cars. It had a lot of, you know, definitive advantages in tests that were run by Car and Driver and Motor Trend.
Yeah, so basically it was just educating the salespeople on these merits that, you in the dealership took that approach, right? And that's kind of what led you to do the research that inevitably became Advanta-STAR. So tell us a little bit about, how you took this approach. So, what did you do with the sales team specifically?
Well, what I did at home alone was I spread out magazines and NHTSA crash test reports and brochures. I went around to all the dealerships and picked up all the brochures on all the cars, and I just listed up on my little old Apple computer all of the different advantages that it had over each one of the specific competitors. Whether it
Mm.
had standard equipment that the other one did, whether it had a longer wheelbase. And then because I was thinking I was dealing with the salespeople primarily, I explained what that advantage meant because you didn't automatically assume that a salesperson would know what a wheelbase was or what it did for the car, because that was also part of what
Right.
I was trying to train up in the sales force. So instead of just listing a wheelbase is 99.2 inches on the Omni and 87.8 inches on the Hyundai Excel, I said for a better ride, for safer, more reliable handling, the Dodge Omni has a much longer wheelbase than the Hyundai Excel, which helps it
So
have
that's where
that
this
stability.
feature, yeah. So that's where the feature benefit advantage format that Advanta-STAR uses kind of came from. That was the impetus, right?
Yeah, because it was meant to inform about the differences between the two automobiles, but it was also meant to inform what those differences meant and to help train the salespeople, both the new ones and a little bit the seasoned ones, what the different terms meant and how they were advantageous to have different features on them.
When I first started, and that holds true with, and about 35 years ago, I can remember a manager saying, Mike, do you have an evidence manual? And I asked him, I said, well, what is that? He said, well, anytime you see a good article about a product that we're selling, and my career started, I was selling Toyotas and Isuzus. He said, any way you can find a good article about the product, put it in a little folder, highlight the good stuff in yellow, and share that with the customer. That way, it's like, well, you're just telling me that because you sell Toyota. And I said, no, this is what Car and Driver said. This is what NHTSA says. And, when you and I first met, about a year later in my career, you had already come up with this, formatted research so that salespeople like myself, and much like the ones that you were training, they had this information available at their fingertips. So tell me a little bit about, once you gathered all of this information and you put it together in a nice, neat little package, how did you present this to the salespeople and how did they respond to this and, go from there?
Well, we turned into about a 48-page list of all the advantages that the Omni had over each of its competitors. And we made copies and we passed them out and went over it in the sales meetings in the morning. And then the salespeople promptly stuffed it in the bottom of their drawer and forgot about it. And
Typical, right?
that was the end of it. I wasted a couple of weekends where I could have been, going out someplace and having some fun. But then what would occur is back then everyone didn't have a smartphone. In fact, all we had was a desk phone, one of those things you could slam down. And so when they ran out of newspaper and other things to read, they would pull it out and just read it in their spare time. And unfortunately, they didn't really absorb much, except they absorbed one thing, and that was the Dodge Omni was a badass little car that had some really good features and was very competitive in its segment, even though it looked 20 years old.
Hmm.
And they began showing the car to customers, and they had enthusiasm because they believed in it. Because you can't sell anything that you don't believe in. And now they believed in the Dodge Omni. They didn't really know why. And so they would show the heck out of the Dodge Omnis, and they started getting people on them and closing some of them. But if the customer wouldn't close on the Dodge Omni right away, they weren't sure, then the salesperson would start to panic and he'd throw everything out of his desk drawer, find that old rumpled copy, and say, here, read this. And then he'd run away and scamper to the podium and talk to the sales manager while the customer was sitting there reading 48 pages of why he should buy a Dodge Omni. And not 48 pages of fluff, but 48 pages of, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says this, Motor Trend test, it stopped in this distance and the Cavalier stopped in this distance. The horsepower is this on the Omni, and that's 12 more horsepower than the Civic. And, over and over, not only positive reinforcing facts about why the Dodge Omni was better, but objective facts and facts from third parties. So by the time the sales manager sent a closer in or sent him back in, the customer generally had sold himself, and it made the whole selling process so much easier for them.
Mhm.
And to cut the long story short, even though it's probably too late for that,
Mhm.
none of those Dodge Omnis saw a birthday. Even the two that I had panicked and put in dealer rent a car, we put pinstripes on and sold them before they'd been there for a year. And
Wow.
it was considered an impossible feat at the time. And none of that, we didn't lose money on any of them either.
So the beauty of what you're talking about is the product that had been dumped on you, literally, and that nobody in the country was having any retail success with. You guys at that dealership, based on your efforts and compilation of all of these merits, from third party, magazines of the day and resources like Car and Driver, like NHTSA, like Motor Trend, you were able to build value with customers because again back then the internet wasn't out, you didn't have Google, you didn't have ChatGPT, so this information that you were able to compile, the salespeople shared it with customers sitting across the desk from them, and they built the value in enough of these where you sold them to the point where you didn't lose money on any of them. So that 3 year supply dwindled and was sold out in less than a year, correct?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we used them as value leaders and placed ads and featured them and everything, but still, until I did that, they just sat.
Yeah.
We were considering just pulling the window wipers off and selling them in the parts department.
And
So,
now, Mike,
go ahead. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
how did you first run into Advanta-STAR? Because you were in sales at the time, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, I met your dad about a year into Advanta-STAR in 1992. I was working for a Dodge retailer, and he came in with one of the binders under his arm, and said, "Here, this is I think you've got one of them, yeah." And I said, "Gosh, this is just takes all the work away that I needed to do research." And when my manager the year before had approached me, he said, "Mike, you're a car guy. You subscribe to all these magazines. You can compile this on your own." Whereas when Within walked in, he had already done all the legwork for us, and to the nth degree. And so, it was very easy for me to take, one of these. Um, Competitive comparison binders, lay it out on the desk, and pull up the competitor that I was shown against with my customer, and we were able to build a value in the product line and sell vehicles where probably we wouldn't have otherwise. Again, the Dodge retailers in the early 90s, we didn't have a lot of great product. I mean, we had good product, but you still had to make the case against a very competitive marketplace. But, we sold Dodge Dynasties against Chevy Luminas, Toyota Camrys, Ford Taurus, Honda Accords. And we were able to build value in the product at the time. And, where a lot of people were struggling to sell the product, we had really very little difficulty. Now did it work every time? No, of course not. But, the more we used it, the more product knowledge we gained.
Mhm.
And, with that redundancy and reinforcement, we became product specialists. And, really in the early 90s, the only real value that Dodge had back then was a Caravan. And they had just introduced the Grand Caravan, so that was pretty much the volume leaders. But we still had other products. You had Spirits, Shadows, Dynasties. The Dodge truck, that it wasn't reimagined until a couple of years later. And the beauty of Advanta-STAR, even then, when Dodge launched the new generation Ram pickup truck in '94, we already had a lot of extensive training from the manufacturer, but the competitive advantages that we had that Advanta-STAR brought to the table for all of us to use, we were able to compete, back then against Ford and Chevrolet. Uh, and the way we looked at it was every Ram pickup that got sold was a Chevy or a Ford that didn't get sold.
Hmm.
And, I can remember when the zone people came in and they said, you're going to sell 250,000 Ram trucks this year. Whereas in '93, they sold less than 85,000. And back then, you got to remember, they only had a regular cab pickup truck,
the
not
first
extended
year it came
cabs or
out.
quad cabs. Those came later. So they went from um,
Fifth
4%
place.
market share in '93 in pickup sales to over 21% market share in a year. So in an industry, when you're looking at fractions of a percentage growth as being a success, you know, the product, sold, but I can tell you locally in the market where what we worked in New Orleans and the general area that used the product, we sold a heck of a lot more and stole a lot more market share than many other areas of the country. And Advanta-STAR was a big part of that because while we had training on the product from the factory from Dodge, we didn't have the competitive information until Advanta-STAR presented it to us. And it made my
Definitely not the
job.
third party information.
That's correct. It's like, oh, you're just saying this because you sell Dodge. No, this is what Motor Trend's saying about our truck. This is what Car and Driver's saying about our truck. This is what Consumer's Guide. This is what Trailer Life. Back then you had a V10 offered in a 3/4 ton, and that was something that was unheard of back in the day. And this thing literally could pull a foundation, building off a foundation. I mean,
Yeah,
it has some serious torque.
What was it, an extra 8 years to get a V10?
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy, the advantages we had. And, then over time, but I mean, you look where the Ram brand is today, 30 years later. But back then, it was tough, convincing a Ford loyalist to buy Dodge. But we did the job. We proved them there was a better product at the time. And same thing with the Chevrolet buyers.
Yeah,
So,
only with a regular cab. And they didn't even have a 3/4 and 1 ton until the next year either.
well, the 3/4 ton came out the first year. It was a late intro.
Yeah,
And
later.
that's the only way you could get the V10. Because I know I would have been ordering them in a 1/2 ton, especially if I could get thick. That would have been great. But let me tell you, it
Yeah.
could still smoke the tires, even with a big, with
Well, we had the
traction.
Magnum V8s by then.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
the
But
318 and the 360 had picked up like
yeah,
45 horsepower overnight when they
right,
redesigned the heads and the multi-point
right. From
turbos.
92 to 93, they changed that. You're absolutely right. They went from throttle body injection to the Magnum, intake system. And it changed the horsepower rating considerably on those V8s and the V6s that had it.
Yeah,
So
it had the variable intake manifold runner length, and
mhm,
the valves grew like this much, and
yeah.
then they even changed the lifter rocker arms ratio so that the lift on the valves was much higher.
We can remember a lot of these things because those were serious, impactful, changes in the industry back then, that we were a part of, on the sales floor dealing with. And Advanta-STAR was right there because as these changes and nuances evolved, Advanta-STAR not only had that in its updated versions that we received, it explained why it was important for these updates, what the impact of changing from a conventional throttle body single intake to a multi-valve fuel injection system could do.
Or even from a carburetor, we still had comparisons to some carburetors
Right.
for the first year or two of the company.
But it made our job a lot easier because the worst thing for a salesperson to do is make something up that they think the customer wants to hear. You know, I've already said that, if automobile salesperson, you can't make an honest mistake. It's that guy lied to me. And, when we go out and we do training with our clients, we make sure to tell them if you don't know, don't make something up. Just tell them,
Find
look, I
out.
don't know, but I'll find out for you. And Advanta-STAR is one of those resources that you can use to find out a lot of this information if you don't know it off the top of your head. And
It's a lot more reliable than Google.
yeah. Well, the thing about Google is this, and just like ChatGPT models, they'll tell you the first thing, they can't guarantee you that it's 100% accurate. That's first and
Right.
foremost. We go to the nth degree to make sure our information is accurate. And to that point and talk about the checklists that have evolved over the years and what you do overseeing our research and development team to make sure that the information we put out to our clients is accurate.
Oh yeah, even in that first year, I had a checklist on a clipboard, and I go out and do them on the competitive models and then on the models that we were doing comparisons of, which all came together now that we do competitive comparisons for all models. And the font got tinier and tinier and tinier as, we added features. We would test how the window locks work, and people think, well, window locks, it's a window lock. But even to this day, there are different types of window locks. You can get in a car, let's say you rent a car, and you have your kids with you, and the kid starts to play with the window. Well, if you're in a certain brand of car and you press the window lock so the kid stops playing with the window, then you can't put that window back up. So you're stuck with the window down. In another brand of car, you press the window lock and the kid's locked out, and then you put the window back up and it's quiet in the car. So we would check the operation of all those features, do multiple measurements, because again, the information was sometimes conflicting between the different manufacturing press sites, brochures, and such. So this way, we get it right at the source.
Yeah.
Sometimes the checklists we would even correct manufacturer errors. I remember, I think it was a 2012 Toyota Corolla. All over the retail website, the brochures, everything, it said it had a one-piece folding rear seat.
I remember that.
Well, okay, some cars have a split, some cars have one piece. And I'm doing the checklist on the Corolla at a dealership in St. Louis. And I'm going 60, 40, 60, 40. Wait a minute. That's not what the website says. So they had it wrong on all of their materials, from their press kits to their brochures to the website. It said that this car had a one-piece folder, which is a disadvantage because, of course, with a 60/40, if you have something long, say a ladder or a couple of 2x4s, you can fold down part of the seat and still have somebody buckled in the rear, so you can have 3-4 passengers and still carry your long cargo.
Yeah.
And so we were able to contact Toyota and have them fix their error. I'd still be curious as to how that ever got propagated.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is a lot of these press kits, are released long before the actual finished product hits the ground. And, we had a similar incident with Honda CRV a few years ago when the initial information that you received said
Oh
it had a
boy.
solid rear axle. And then when it hit the ground, it had independent rear suspension. We actually had a dealer alert us to that and said, wait, what are you guys doing? And it's like we went back and verified it and went out and said, sure as heck, this is where the information was sourced. And to your point, we had to not contact the Honda people and say, hey, the information you've got out there and all your sources says X, and here it is on the ground, and a change has been made.
Yeah,
So,
when that CRV first came out, we had to go by the press kit because they
correct.
weren't in the dealerships yet to do the checklist. So we went by
Right.
the press kit,
Yeah.
and it was early preliminary information. And somehow it was real bad.
Yeah, it was, and those things happen, and I tell people, look, we're human, we're subject to make mistakes, but we go to the nth degree to make sure the information that our subscribers have is up to date, it's accurate, it's relevant, and you can rely on this, to build a value wherever the touch points are with your customers. And the beauty of the product and the way it's evolved over the years, we've evolved with the industry as well. Again, when the internet came out in the late 80s, late 90s, and everybody was getting dealer websites, we were one of the first organizations to post our information readily available on a dealer website. And then, from an evolution standpoint, the information's been consistent, but the delivery is what has changed. I can remember putting this information on CD-ROM years ago, and then we had folks say, "Hey, can you put this on my BlackBerry?" And then when the iPhone came out, the format we had was consistent with the first iPhones. So somebody anywhere on the dealer lot that had an internet connection could pull the information available. While even if they're demonstrating a vehicle and they have a signal. And that still holds true today. I know within you're holding up an iPad or an iBook right now. A lot of salespeople use our tool in-house the same way. Um,
Well, I
Anywhere
was
that
just
they
going
can
to
pull this up.
go over the evolution of the checklist. Back 10 or 12 years ago, the checklist was getting so complex and
Mm.
difficult to do. So we developed an entire iPad app. Over 10 years ago, we had to develop a complete iPad app to take over the work of taking the checklists.
And
And
correct me if I'm wrong, with and on the checklist that you have now, you can upload that directly into our computer programs. It's not something that years ago, like you had to manually transfer it. This automatically uploads, correct?
well, actually, we still do it manually. It could be done automatically, and we looked at that shortly. But uh, one of the issues with our reliability is that everything goes through manual checks all the time. Like that's what
Fair
happened with
enough.
the Corolla. If we had automatic checks, the Corolla, when we found the 60-40 split on the rear seat, it would have been overridden because it was on the retail website and the brochure, and it would have just been dropped.
Hmm.
Okay, so what you're saying is even though you're doing the manual checklist on this app that you created, we still go to that extra step of verifying and making sure as it
Exactly.
transfers over, the default isn't overridden when there's a change.
Yeah, because if I see a conflict between what's here and what's on the retail website or somewhere else, well, then that has to be resolved. We have a balanced weighting that we do to overall defer conflicts, but we prefer to go in and absolutely verify it.
Gotcha. Okay. And that's a great point. Again, a lot of the resources that people may be using or referring, they're not going to go to that degree like we have. And again, we've got a 35-year track record of accuracy. And, we've got obviously thousands of subscribers that rely on this information every day to build value and train their salespeople on their product, especially versus their competitors.
And it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to complete one of these checklists on just one model.
That is an intense form.
Yeah, it is. But there's just so much technology that's built into cars. I mean, take us through a little bit of that with and over the years, especially the last 10 years. There's been so much change in the industry. Back in the day, yeah, it's got tilt wheel, cruise control.
Yeah.
Here's the
Or the
settings for
original
your.
loaded power steering, power
Yeah,
brakes.
right, right. It's fully loaded, right? Now, if somebody hadn't bought a car in 7, 8 years, they get behind the wheel. It's nothing but a touch screen. And they're like, their mind is blown. Especially if they're approaching our age and, they're used to all the digital or analog type speedometer, odometer, things like that.
What do you guys
Oh, the
think about those
alphabet soup.
touchscreen interfaces? Do they seem safe for driving?
As
I
long as they're
believe
working.
that, yeah, I believe that the touchscreen is not inherently unsafe, but that in general, the concept of a touchscreen is generally going to be less safe than a traditional interface.
Yeah, I
As
agree.
we,
I think, depending on the ambient light that's coming through, I mean, a lot of these things have these automatic features where it'll dim it if you're in a tunnel or you're in a rainstorm, and it may make the screen a little less discernible, especially if someone has, even mild vision impacts. Um, you
and the
know,
main thing is the UI.
Hmm.
I recall way back in the day when I was driving, probably way too fast, that I would be able to reach with my hand down to the air conditioning, and because there was a row of buttons, and I knew which one was air, which one was max air, which one was vent, which one was heat, which one was defrost, because they were all big, thick buttons that pushed in when I pushed them.
You could
And the
physically
temperature
feel
was
them,
a
yeah.
slider, left for cold, right for hot,
Hmm.
and then the fan switch was a toggle, and it up higher, and you do all that without looking at
Yep.
mhm.
all because
Yeah.
the feel of each one was unique. It went in a specific direction, and it had a big old chunky clunk when you pushed it in. Same with the radio. I mean, you had the volume knob, and you clicked it once, and it was on. And then you turned it slowly, and it went up. And then you had the big buttons to hit each memory on the stations,
Yeah,
and
you had to pull out the
everything.
tab and then push it in order to save it.
Oh, that
Yep.
was a little older than I was thinking, but yeah,
Oh yeah,
exactly.
oh
I
yeah,
did have those too, but
yeah. But again, there was definitely some sort of a reinforcement that whatever act you were looking to perform was
Yeah,
complete. There was no ambiguity. Did I hit the right button? Did I hit it hard enough?
yeah.
You
Yeah,
you knew. Okay,
And
no,
some of
it's not blowing
these,
cold. I hit the wrong button. Okay, let me look over there
yeah,
and,
some of
and
these,
take
they
care
have
of it.
important safety features buried in the menu. And you have to
oh
go,
goodness.
no, one, two, okay, there's the defroster, or, boop, boop, oh, they're the what? They actually have wipers, windshield wipers in the touchscreen on some of these.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Now,
not sure about that.
the wipers are automatic, and so if you don't mess with
Mhm.
them, they should come on. But even with rain sensing wipers, you've had to adjust them one way or the other. For
Yeah.
instance, you have to turn them off before you go into a car wash. So you've turned them off, you leave the car wash, then suddenly you're driving, on the highway or the interstate, and it starts storming, and you have to go into that touch screen, one, two different levels to try to get it. That being
Yeah.
said, some do a better job with the touchscreens.
Yeah.
The size, they're all going up in size. I mean, I forget what the largest one is, but the largest one is way larger than my first television.
Yeah.
And then, uh, but the organization of some touchscreen UIs is better than others.
For
Right.
sure.
And like I said, when Tesla came out with their big, basic screen, I mean, everybody's like, "My God, look how awesome this is!" And this is what everybody needs to go to. And
Hmm.
it's in its own form had a lot of function, but there was still a lot of the basic functions that you had to still use one of the stalks to change lanes and put on the wipers and things like that. Again, a
And
lot of
you've
these,
had companies that have backtracked,
yeah,
like Honda had to
Mm.
put a volume knob back for their radio.
yeah. Yeah. One of the things talking about radios when back in the early 90s, mid 90s, when I was selling, General Motors had a feature called SCV on their radios. And what people didn't realize it was called speed control volume was the acronym.
Oh, yeah.
So that as you increased your speed, the volume on the radio went up accordingly
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
to drown out whatever road noise that there may have been. And, but the thing is, people still want to be able to control and know where these things are. You know, growing up, I can remember, people saying that your vehicle is an extension of you. And, my son the same way, the way I taught him how to drive. When he started on his truck, I mean, he could park a truck, back it in, sideways, forward, I don't care. But it was an extension of him. It just becomes part of you. I think a lot of these touch screens are taking away a lot of that ability.
Definitely.
And again, my thing is, okay, great, that touchscreen works great today. It's designed by a computer. What happens if there's an issue with it? Um, you got to replace the
They,
whole thing.
they
If it
actually had
goes
a
dark, what
recall
happens?
already.
Yeah, if it
The
goes dark, you
On a
know,
certain manufacturer that had a dashboard that was made up of the screen, and the screen would have a glitch, and then there's no speedometer, and that
yeah,
is illegal right there. It's
you're
so
nothing.
they had to have a recall for it. But just imagine the poor guy whose digital dashboard is dark and he has no idea how fast he's
Well,
going. And
exactly.
I have that on my 1991 Dodge because it's got a broken odometer and speedometer gear, but that's a whole different thing.
That's a
And in
91
terms
model.
of the car being like an extension of yourself, like the tactile nature of the buttons, the physical buttons, is extremely important because, like you were talking about, you need to be able to do it without watching, without looking. Your eyes need to be on the road because if you're
Right.
going 75 miles an hour, you look away for 1 second, well, boom, you've moved 800 feet or whatever, and you were just not
Mhm.
even looking. I was at the
Correct.
museum the other day, and they had a map for blind people, so you could go up and touch it and feel like all these different things. You need to make the interface for the radio, etc., like that because you are essentially blind. You cannot look anywhere but the road. You need to have your eyes on the road. Like it's ridiculous that it's a touchscreen.
Yeah. I would think that there's going to be some sort of tactile function built into it at some point. There has to.
Eventually, they're going to make touch screens that can have tactile changes to them.
Hmm.
Yeah. I
It's theoretically possible. They'll develop the technology.
yeah, when they get enough blowback and feedback on, what worked and what didn't work, the manufacturers they'll adapt to, trends and changes. And, there's enough people out there commenting on the products.
Hmm.
They get enough blowback, they'll make the
But
changes.
but for the time being, one large touch screen is way less expensive than 5 analog gauges with dials and several dozen switches,
Yeah,
buttons, knobs, tuners. I mean, all of that individual physical
mhm,
analog control is quite expensive when you add it up. I mean, if
yeah,
we were talking about one volume knob, that's not too expensive. But once you talk about a volume knob, a tuner knob, uh, sliders for different things, the little
yeah,
rheostat for your dashboard lights. Once you get into all of those different knobs and buttons of an automotive grade that has to last 10, 15, 20 years, then
yeah.
touchscreen turns out to be less expensive in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the digital displays that were in the early 90s, I mean, I sold some General Motors vehicles and you had the orange
LED,
displays,
yeah.
et cetera. And, the LEDs that they had on those, they didn't last very long. They had a lot of problems with those. Those were a
I
warranty
think the first
nightmare.
LCDs were they
Yeah,
did LCDs in some odometers
correct,
in the
correct.
90s. A couple of them.
And
Those
yeah,
did a little better.
yeah, they had to change those over time, but then they got away with that, got away from it, because they had too many warranty issues, and it's just not going to last. That they found. I mean, you've got those things in a vehicle that's out in the heat, especially like we have here in South Louisiana. It's just the wear and tear, even in a short period of time. Um,
The in my car, the little digital thing that tells you the outside temperature
mhm.
failed. It's
Yeah,
just got lines on it. It's dead. I don't know
yeah.
what part to replace to get that to work again.
Yeah, I mean it's exposed to the sun, so it's going to opaque over time and become less functional and
No,
accurate.
no, it can't detect the sensor has been fried. It can't
Yeah.
detect what temperature it is
Well,
when it got
exactly. It's only
too
going to have a
hot too many
certain
times.
useful life. Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And they got different, ways of doing that now. But, the thing I see with these big screen digital, excuse me, these touch screens that are evolving. It's for a younger audience, okay? And the
They're
folks who
used to
grew
that
up
interface.
playing, on PlayStation, they're looking at some of these functions that they can press on their handheld device that they're playing, doing this gamification. And that's
But I
basically
think
what it's
even
evolved in.
millennials, Z's, X's, and everything will be a lot
Right.
better off with tactile control. Because remember,
Yeah.
they had A and B buttons. They had the little
Yeah.
X
Oh
buttons. So
yeah.
they had tactile controls, even though they were looking at screens.
And it's what
So I
Correct.
people
think,
prefer, to be honest. Like
yeah,
there's
Well,
like all these small companies that are making like analog devices like people love mechanical keyboards and the clickety clickety
keyboards, yeah.
clack. Like people are buying keyboards with little dials and it's
but
like
you want the
knobs and whatnot.
feedback, the
Yep,
clickety clack you're
Exactly.
talking about. Did I
100%.
hit the right key? Am I just, I
Yep.
mean, again, it's you got to have feedback some kind of way that you're doing the right thing. But
Hmm.
to that point, I mean, you look at a Formula One driver or an IndyCar driver, okay? Everything's done on a handheld on that steering wheel,
Yeah,
okay?
that being
Can't
said,
afford to look away, okay? They're not looking down at
other than the touch
or whatever,
screen,
but everything is up there.
something else that some other new feature that's come out that I think is excellent, right over here on my screen. Let's see,
Hmm.
you can see it.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, I think it was in 1991 that Ford and Dodge started putting the cruise control buttons on the steering wheel.
Hmm.
And now you have cruise control, you've got following distance, you've got, let's see if I can show you. You've got Bluetooth, you've got to answer the phone, you've got the menus that you can
Pretty
change
much
all of them.
everything's there with your thumbs.
So you don't have to reach behind the steering wheel. You don't have to reach for something else. You don't have to use the touch screen. In
And
fact,
they still
that
have
was the
that.
saving grace of the volume on the Honda that, the Honda said, well, you can use the steering wheel, but some people weren't used to that. But
Yeah.
it's so much better to have things on the steering wheel because those are tactile buttons.
Right.
Then
I
you have
mean,
somebody that screws that up.
yeah.
Uh, a certain
I mean, I
European
can.
company has the buttons on the steering wheel, but they're not tactile.
Oh
They're
no.
capacitive sensing.
Oh no.
And
Yeah.
so far, people hate it.
Yeah. I know in our car, I've got so many display items with my thumb. The volume is on one side, but on the back of the steering wheel to raise it up and
Yeah.
down. I've got the knobs to be able to adjust different functions. The cruise controls on the left side. What I find interesting is domestics put cruise on the left, the foreign imports have it on the right in a lot of cases. And I know when I go rent a car somewhere, I've got to go look for those things there. Um, you know,
Well, easier you're finding on the steering wheel than trying to find it on one of the stops.
Correct. I mean, again, the early cruise controls, again, way back when, was on the tip of a turn signal, and you had a little button on the top to engage it, and
Little
then you had
switch,
to
yeah.
press it in, let go as you let go of your foot off the accelerator to
Right.
make sure it engaged, and then
Even earlier than that, the original ones, they had it on the dash. So you
I'm
had
talking
to,
early 70s,
I'm
General
talking
Motors.
about fifties and sixties. For cruise
Fair
control,
enough.
the old Cadillacs and Chryslers, they had it on the dash. Of course, it wasn't
Okay.
called cruise control. I forget what they call it,
So does like,
Cruise-O-Matic or
do
Yeah.
the Teslas still have tons of all those tactile controls on those steering wheel? Yeah.
mm, they.
Depends on the
I have to
model.
look it up.
Dang.
They have a few of them. Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
they
that's
have some of them.